Welcome to my channel, The Binge Eating Therapist. I'm Sarah, former binge eater turned psychotherapist, and my mission is to use this space to bring content to you to help you understand your struggle with food and break free from binge eating. And today I want to talk about restriction versus restraint and how we might think about it with food. So broadly speaking, restriction it's a limit or a limitation, it's a rule, whereas restraint is about holding something back. If you restrain someone, you hold them back. So how we might think of the subtleties between these with food is restriction is the rule or the limit that almost seems outside of yourself, and restraint is your ability to hold yourself back, but when that also might be problematic as well is worth considering. So I've come up with an example to try to illustrate the difference and how the two might feel different. So here in the UK, and I'm guessing it's the same in many other countries, we have speed restrictions on our roads. We have speed limits that you are supposed to drive underneath. I would say the majority of people drive over the speed limit. Most people just drive a bit over the speed limit, and you'll get some people that will drive a lot over the speed limit. And what I thought was interesting to notice is how people respond when they are forced to drive below the speed limit. So if somebody is on a street and they get stuck behind, let's say, a learner driver or someone who's driving below the speed limit, what you'll often see is the car behind, you can almost see the agitation in the driver without even seeing the driver's face. And they'll drive up close to the car, and maybe they're looking to see if they can get around the car, and they're experiencing tension at being forced to drive below the speed limit. Compare that to, we have average speed checks, which is over the space maybe of a few miles. There's several cameras and it works out your average speed. And when you go into one of these areas, everybody slows down and drives at the speed limit. No one's driving upside each other's backsides. People just seem to drive at that speed limit for a while, and then when they're able to, they'll speed up and go faster than the speed limit. Now in the first example, if you're stuck behind someone driving slowly, your speed is being forcibly restricted. You don't have a choice. Whereas when you're in the average speed check area, in theory, you could drive faster if you wanted to. You're choosing not to because you don't want the negative consequences. The consequences being you might get a ticket and a fine. And so then people restrain themselves from driving faster. There's a little bit more of an element of choice. They're choosing to drive slower because they don't want a ticket. Whereas you're stuck behind someone, you've got no choice. And those two things feel different. One is more tense than the other. So what does this mean when it comes to food? Sometimes I'll get the question, people will ask, is it possible to recover from binge eating if I have food restrictions? Because we all hear that message that restriction causes binge eating, or at the very least makes it worse. If we look at a very common food restriction, we might think of vegetarians and vegans. Now, if someone becomes vegetarian or vegan because it really aligns with their values and their belief systems and just feels like the right thing to do, chances are they're not experiencing a lot of tension around that restriction. It's probably not going to be a problem for them. I tried in the past to go vegetarian and vegan when I was struggling with binge eating, but my motives were not in the right place. So for me, it did cause more binge eating. So it wasn't about the behaviour of having the animal products or not having the animal products. It was about that feeling of tension and the motivation behind this restriction. Compare this to somebody who has a medical restriction. I'm going to use celiac as an example because it's a simple one that people don't tend to argue back and forth about whether somebody with celiac disease has to give up gluten or not. It is advised not to eat gluten. It's problematic. Now, this isn't something that anyone chooses for themselves. It is forced upon them. So particularly if you struggle with binge eating or disordered eating in general, that is going to cause some tension. So the goal is, with any kind of food restriction, is the question to be asked is, how do I reduce this tension that I feel around having this food restriction? Now this feels like another video in and of itself, but just quickly off the top of my head, the idea of acceptance, like accepting this condition, and I know that can sound easier than it actually is, but asking yourself, what are the benefits of accepting that I have celiac disease or whatever it might be? And taking some time to think about that and write a list. Some that might come up would be, actually I might feel a bit more peaceful. There would be less conflict inside me. I wouldn't be constantly battling with this. I might just feel a little bit calmer, and that might make my thinking clearer when it comes to making decisions. Also, focusing on making it a choice. Because for a lot of people, even with medical restrictions, you can still technically eat that food. There's just a consequence to it, and you might suffer for it. So it's this idea of I am going to choose to focus on the foods that I am eating, focusing what it is that I'm doing as opposed to what it is that I'm not allowed to do. And I've worked with celiacs that will binge on gluten-free foods, and I've worked with celiacs that binge on gluten. So for some people, it's like whether they've actually taken out their diet or not is not the part that causes the binge eating. It's the tension about the restriction or that they should restrict. So if we think about this idea of restraint, and when restraint might be a healthy, helpful thing for us to do, because the all or nothing thinking goes, well, I'm either restricting, or if I don't have the limitations and rules, I'm in the chaos. Like I don't know how to exercise any restraint or moderation without the restriction and the rules in. So an example for me was when Five Guys first came to the UK, everyone was going on about how amazing Five Guys was. And I can remember one day going with a colleague and having lunch at Five Guys and thinking, this is all right, I don't really see what the big fuss is about. And a couple of days later, I was driving back from therapy and I drove past a Five Guys. And my brain just went, oh, I think I want a Five Guys. So I pulled over and I went and I got myself a Five Guys for dinner and I had it. And again, I was eating it and thinking like, it's all right, but I don't really see what the fuss is all about. A week later, on the same day at the same time, I'm driving back from therapy. And as I drive by Five Guys, I have this same urge for a Five Guys. And in that moment, I could see, I'm slipping into a habit here. And I don't think I want the habit of always having a Five Guys after therapy. And I knew that the more often I did this at the same day at the same time, it was going to become something that would end up having a energy of its own, and it'd be harder to break it once it's become a habit. And so in that moment I said, no, I'm not going to have a Five Guys because I don't want to turn this into a habit. And when I made that decision, there was no tension. It made sense to me. I wasn't saying to myself, oh, I shouldn't have a Five Guys. Five Guys is bad. If I have a Five Guys, I'm going to be completely out of control later. So the reasons for why we might restrain ourselves are important. So whether it's need to restrict for whatever reasons, whether it's attempting to restrain yourself, what you're paying attention to is this tension. We get so tied up in what is it we're actually eating, and that the goal is to change our eating. But actually, this is about mental and emotional management, that if we can get that part and look after that part, the actual shifts in how we eat that will support us better will happen a lot more easily and a lot more naturally. But people try and just change the food without noticing the mental and emotional impact of trying to force themselves to change the way they eat. If you are early in your recovery, this will be tricky to tell the difference. That's why it's really important to have permission. Someone asked me the other day, do I still battle with binge urges? And I heard that and I was like, you cannot battle with binge urges. If you go to battle with them, you will increase the tension, and the way that your brain and body knows how to release the tension quite often is to binge. So it's not about when a binge urge comes going, no, I mustn't give in to this binge urge, I'm going to resist it, rather than focusing on resisting it or this just saying no that's creating more tension. The only way I found to ride that through without creating tension was to accept the binge urge. Sometimes I went and I just laid down with it and I just felt it and I mentally explored it and I moved into it. Now this doesn't work if you are restricting as well, and if the permission part isn't there, because the only reason that I could do that was because I still had permission to go and eat afterwards. If you're saying, okay, I need to feel this binge urge so I mustn't binge, you are still creating more tension. You're not creating that tension reduction that's needed. So it is okay to say no to food, but the question to ask is, do my reasons make sense? Why are you saying no? Is your no creating more tension? If it's creating more tension, it's probably going to lead to more binging. And when I talk about tension, it could be physical tension. from feeling physically deprived, it could be mental tension, and it could be emotional tension. And sometimes I use the word agitation. It's such a non-specific feeling sometimes. It's often not, happy, sad, angry, guilty, shame. It's just this discomfort, right? This energy that we're trying to expel. And what permission to eat does is it's actually trying to reduce that tension so that you can start making choices. So you can start saying yes and no to food. So this is not a video about how to just say no to food. This is a video about how to reduce tension so that you can actually make a free choice. Anyway, hope that was helpful. See you on the next video.